Detroit, you know, is a city of 2 million people, but there were probably 12 or 14 people that I knew of who wrote poetry. And we had a little thing called the Miles, a man who had taught at Wayne had been killed in World War II, and he willed his library. He was a friend of Berryman's, actually. He willed his library to the school. He had a vast library. He was a wealthy man. And they created enough money to create a room where just his library was. And they made some effort to keep it up to date. And there were so few of us that we were always kind to each other. You know, oh, Charlie, your poems are better every moment, you know.
Really honest writing.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you know, it was what I needed at the time. I needed encouragement. I needed someone to tell me that what I was doing was worth doing. After all, I was reading. And I was reading poets who were not that much older than I was. I mean, here I'm now, I don't know, about 26, and I'm working. And when I got free of that, I thought, I really need a larger world. And I'd heard about the University of Iowa, and I heard that Robert Lowell was going to be teaching there. And Robert Lowell, at the time, he wasn't that much older than I would say 26. He was not 40 yet. It's about 37 or 8. And so I went essentially to study with him. I would have to say as a teacher, he was a disaster. He was a disaster. He had a way of suggesting that the voyage to a total understanding of a poem, say by Auden or William Empson or John Crowe Ransom, was like virtue, the Protestants' notion of the appointed. You either had it or you didn't have it. And so the teaching was a waste of time. You know, it was like knowing what shoes to wear with a blue suit. I mean, if you didn't know what shoes to wear with a blue suit, why don't you just go home, you know? Well, none of us had a blue suit, so... but there was this superiority. He was a Lowell, you know, one of the great families, not only in terms of the city of Boston, but in terms of American letters. And now and then, one got an insight into the fact there was a person in this act. There really was. But it was rare. What we didn't know as students was he was on the threshold of a terrible breakdown. And that, a month or so after the class ended, he was in a hospital. You know. Yeah, with the first of a series of breakdowns. And then Berryman came. And Berryman was there for 2 days before he fell down a flight of stairs and broke his wrist. He was not sober, of course.
He drank a bit.
He drank a bit, but he never came to class inebriated, or even, you know, he didn't drink before class at all. And he took that class with a seriousness that I had never seen before. I mean, here was this brilliant man preparing for each of our classes and letting us know that what we were doing here was immensely important. It was during the Army McCarthy hearings, and one day he came to class with the New York Times, and he held it up and he said, "You see these fools? These thieves and fools and liars? 10 years from now, they will be replaced by other thieves and fools and liars. Public crooks." He put it down, and he picked up a book and read Keats' poem to Autumn. And he said, "If this language survives 1,000 years, this poem will be as beautiful as it is at this moment." I mean, he was entrancing. He was magnetic and inspiring and very hard on our work. But since he was hard on all of us, whereas Lowell had kind of played favorites, Berryman didn't play favorites. He just murdered all of us. I mean, Donald Justice, who later won the Pulitzer Prize, and W.D. Snodgrass, who won the Pulitzer Prize, and I think practically everybody in the class published. I know everyone did, yes. But he hammered us.
And you only had him for quite a short time, didn't you? But
yes.
The impact is obviously...
Yes, 15 weeks. And the last time that semester that I saw him, I drove him to the airport so that he could go back to New York. And the night before we got, this is quite funny, we got very drunk. I mean, that's what he did every night, but I did it with him, and we sort of passed out. And I woke up in the morning. Berryman was in his pajamas in bed, and I was lying still dressed on top of the bed. I didn't remember getting there. And somebody was knocking at the door. He had this little apartment, and the bedroom actually faced the hallway. He came up a flight of stairs, and there was this knock, 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 knock. And Berryman was very nearsighted. And he looked at me. And then he said, yes, yes, who is it? Open the door. And it was so long ago, you know, the telegrams, people, and it was a telegraph boy. And he said, telegram for Mr. John Berryman. And Berryman turned to me and said, are you John Berryman? I said, no. And he said, well, then I must be. And he took the telegram. And he said, I hope it's from Saul Bellow. He's making so much money on his writing, I need to stay close to him. He had a marvelous sense of humor, absolutely marvelous sense of humor. And he was severe. He was severe. He would make somebody come up to the board and say, all right, Philip, tell us how you would go about researching the poetry of Charles Churchill. I said, first, I'd go to the library and look his name up in the card catalog. We didn't have Google then. You know. I had never heard of Charles. You've never heard of Charles Churchill? Philip, my God. You're supposed to be a scholar. I actually wasn't even registered in the class because I didn't have any money. So I just came in, and week after week, he would ask me. He would read the roll and say, Philip, your name isn't on here. I said, oh, you know bureaucracies, how they screw things up. And he said, one day he said to me, you know that you're the only Jewish fellow in the class. It could be anti-Semitism. But that last day that I drove him to the airport, he said to me, someday, a year and a half from now, send me 4 poems, and I will read them and tell you how bad they are, and then you're on your own.
And you did?
And I did. And by that time I was publishing in magazines, and he sent me back a letter saying, I'm delighted to see that you have fooled editors with your terrible poems. But each poem was meticulously annotated. I mean, he really took this seriously. He was a great teacher. He was the greatest teacher I ever had, and an inspiration. Someone who could give you a sense of, at that time in America, with really awful things happening, with the terror, the whole right-wing anti-communist nonsense created in America, to have someone sit there and say, this matters, that doesn't.